Hello, Mike here, coming to you from the Art House in Sheffield. In this video I will be running through how to roll out coils of clay. I'm just going to start with my pound of clay and to begin I'm just bashing it out into something a bit longer and thinner, patting it between my palms like so, to make it something that's going to be a bit more manageable to roll out on the surface. So, to stop it sticking to the plywood surface, I'm just rolling it out on a bit of canvas matting here. So I'm using the palms of my hands and my fingers just flat against the clay. So with each roll, I'm going to be starting at my fingertips and rolling all the way to the heel of my hands here and then back again. So what we don't want to do is short, kind of fast rolls like this, because by doing kind of short ones like so, you're not giving the clay the opportunity to sort of rotate all the way around. So you can just end up with it kind of rolling out and becoming a bit more of an irregular shape. So smooth, long rolls, starting in the centre, and as we roll it out, just kind of working towards the ends. So starting in the centre, towards the ends, like so. So it is important to pay attention to the whole length of the coil. What you don't want to do is focus loads on thinning out the central part and then work onto towards the ends, because once that middle part has gotten really thin, if you still have really thick ends here and here, you can end up with it breaking in the middle. So really making the most of the entire length of your palms and of your fingers, and just slowly working outwards from the centre to the ends. And just really trying to pay attention to how the clay feels against your hands, identifying any slightly thicker or slightly thinner areas, and if it feels a bit thin in places, just easing off the pressure in that area, or similarly, if it feels a bit thicker in other areas, just applying a bit more pressure. So because this coil has now gotten quite long, but I still want to thin it out a bit more, I'm just going to cut it more or less in half down the middle and just continue to work on each half just to thin them out a bit more. And the thinness that you roll your coil out to will just depend on how thin you want the finished piece to feel. So thinner coils will result in more refined feeling and more kind of lightweight and elegant pieces, but they will be more fiddly to work with, and there will be an increased risk of things going wrong. So if you're new to rolling out coils and working with them, leaving them a bit thicker, so something more like about 1 centimetre in diameter will tend to work quite well. So that's where this is up to now. So from here, I'm just going to roll this up on itself. So to make the base of a form out of a coil, you can just roll it up and then smooth it out. So this can be an alternative to, say, rolling out a slab if you're not keen on rolling out slabs for whatever reason. A coil can also be transformed into a flat surface. So just starting at one end, tightly closing it in on itself, and just rolling it up. So we've got this sort of snail effect going on. So as it is, it's still very much looking like a coil. This is when we're just going to blend these joints together. So because we're joining the clay in on itself, we do need to be very thorough with smoothing these surfaces over. So just starting from the centre and really blending those joins together. We are going to give this a pass over with a rubber kidney as well, but to start with, just blending over those creases. Flipping it over and doing the same on the other side. So at this stage we've smoothed over the creases, but the surface is still fairly lumpy and irregular. So this is where using our rubber kidney comes into play. So just passing over that surface. So pulling towards myself in one direction, rotating 90 degrees. So as we did when we rolled out a slab in another video, we just want to be really thorough with the compression of the clay at this stage. So we're doing it in two directions on one side, flipping it over, and then again doing it in two directions at 90 degrees to each other on the underside as well. So we're just thinning it out slightly, compressing the clay and really making sure that those coils are really thoroughly joined together. So we have here a very small but irregularly shaped what we've turned into a slab from a coil. So if I grab a nice round template and just hold that over the top of this, firmly in place, we can just use a craft knife to cut all the way around that. So this now gives us a nice round base to which we can add further coils to build up into something taller. So if I just put that to the side for a moment and grab the other half of the coils I was working with. So again, just rolling this out to thin it. So a similar thickness to the original coil, so about 1 centimetre in diameter. Again, because it's gotten quite long, I'll just cut it in half again. So to add the coils to our base, I'm just going to grab a turntable, pop the base on here like so. I'm just going to grab a square of newspaper. So because I don't want this coil or this base of clay sticking to the banding wheel, just by putting a small amount of newspaper underneath it like so, will stop that from sticking. So to build the piece up, we're going to start just firmly pressing that coil onto the edge, then working it around like so. So when you get to this stage here and the coil returns to itself, you have two options, one of which is to keep the coil going and keep it going until it naturally comes to an end. But it can be worthwhile cutting it off here so that the first layer stays level. The risk is that by continuing it around like so, you can end up with this irregularly forming shape. So by cutting the coil off here, we'll end up with the first layer done, laid down, and it's going to be nice and level rather than having this undulating surface. So quite a nifty way of doing this is to grab a small wire harp like so, and I'm just going to cut diagonally down through the coils like this, remove this excess here, and then these coils fit nicely together. So all of this will now need to be blended thoroughly into itself. So just using my fingertips to firmly push these together. So we don't want to see any joins at all. So often when you join two pieces of clay together, you would need to do what we call scoring and slipping. So scoring being marking the surface of the clay or thoroughly cross-hatching the surface of the clay, and then applying a slip, which is essentially clay in liquid form, which acts as a kind of cement to bond the two surfaces together. So because the clay is quite soft at this stage, and because we're being very thorough with this blending together of the coils, as long as we are thorough with the blending, we should be able to get by without having to score and slip each layer. So I'm going to grab my second bit of coil now. Again, just starting here and working around. Laying it over, grabbing my harp, cutting through at that diagonal there, removing this, removing that little bit there. You may find that you just need to remove a tiny bit more, like so, and then they fit nicely together. So I'll be back in just a second, armed with a few more coils, just so that we can add a few more layers to this and give it a bit more height. So I'll be back in a tick. So I'm back with a few more coils just to add a bit more height to this piece here. So one thing that's worth mentioning is before you start smoothing over each layer, it's worth making a note of where this join here happens. What you don't want to do is to start and finish each coil at this same point, because then you'll have a potential weak spot in each coil working all the way up. So what you want to do is, after putting this layer here down, I'd rotate it just 90 degrees like so. So we had this layer here starting and finishing here. Our new layer will start 90 degrees from it. And then each subsequent layer, as we get higher, just rotating it 90 degrees each time, just to distribute that potential weakness throughout the whole piece. So you don't have to smooth each layer and blend them together as you go. It's generally worth building up a few layers and then blending them into one another in one go. So I'll just build up a couple more layers. So again, starting here, just pressing it firmly down into that layer below. So now that we have a few layers built up, I'm just going to start blending the layers that we have so far thoroughly into each other. So on the inside, I'm just using my thumb to work those coils firmly together and maintaining pressure inwards from the outside, just to stop the whole piece from opening outwards too much. So once we've blended the inside thoroughly together, we can do the same thing on the outside. So generally working in this downwards motion towards the base, and then starting to work our way upwards through each subsequent layer. So at this stage, with the clay being quite soft, we're really just focusing on getting the basic shape and making sure those coils are thoroughly blended together. And when the piece has stiffened up a bit more and we can work with it without it distorting very easily, that's when the real refinement is going to take place. So whilst it's going to look fairly crude and wobbly at this stage, once it's stiffened up, that's when it will start to take form and look a bit more presentable as a piece. So I've just added a few more coils there to give it a bit more height. One thing that I've done is I've kept it quite narrowly enclosed. One of the main pitfalls that you can come across with coil building is that the whole thing can start to get very baggy and open outwards a lot more than you want it to. So by closing it in and keeping it quite narrow to start with here, it's much easier to kind of pinch it and open it outwards than it would be to close it back in on itself. So by starting out with something a bit more narrow like so, you do have a bit more versatility with the shape that you end up with. Whereas if you have something that is quite open at the top, there isn't really an easy way to close it back in on itself. So to level off the rim and make it nice and flat, I'm just going to grab my craft knife, holding it very firmly in one place. So I'm just starting by drawing a level line. So just resting the bottom edge of my hand here on the turntable, holding the tip of the knife where it is, drawing that line around, and then once I'm happy with that line, just pushing all the way through and removing this rim. So that sorts the rim out, and then from here it's just going to be a case of using the paddle. So just supporting the inside with my left hand, gently tapping into the surface with the paddle. So that's just a brief run through of the basics of building a form out of coils. Next up, we're going to leave this to stiffen up so that it can be worked with further to just refine the shape, get rid of all the lumpiness and wobbliness, all that kind of thing. So that's it for the time being, and we'll see you in the next video.